The dog barks furiously in front of his owner's coffin. When they open it, everyone around becomes desperate. In the quiet town of Greenfield, nestled among verdant mountains and flowery fields, life followed its tranquil and predictable rhythm. The residents, mostly farmers and artisans, knew each other by name and shared their joys and sorrows like a big family. Among them, John Smith stood out, a middle-aged farmer known for his kindness and the unconditional love he dedicated to the land and animals. John was inseparable from his faithful companion, a large mixed-breed dog named Thunder. The duo was seen daily traversing the fields, tending to the crops and helping neighbors whenever needed. On an autumn morning, when golden leaves danced in the wind, the town's routine was abruptly interrupted. Desperate screams echoed across the fields, catching everyone's attention. It was Mary, John's wife, who had found her husband collapsed in the middle of the cornfield, motionless and unresponsive. Neighbors rushed to help, carrying John to his house while others went to fetch Dr. Thompson, the only physician in the area. The atmosphere of tension was palpable, and worried murmurs spread like waves among the residents who gathered in front of the Smiths' residence. Thunder, John's faithful dog, was restless. He ran back and forth, barking incessantly, as if trying to communicate something that no one could understand. His eyes, full of anguish, were fixed on the house's door, through which his owner had been carried. Dr. Thompson arrived breathless, his leather bag hitting against his leg as he hurried into the house. Silence fell over the crowd waiting outside, interrupted only by Thunder's occasional barks and whimpers. After what seemed like an eternity, the doctor emerged from the house with a grave expression. His tired gaze swept over the anxious faces before uttering the words no one wanted to hear. "I'm sorry, but John has passed away." A cry of pain escaped Mary's lips, echoing through the town and mingling with Thunder's heart-wrenching howls. The news spread quickly, leaving a trail of disbelief and sadness. John Smith, the man everyone loved and respected, was gone. As preparations for the wake began, no one noticed that Thunder had stopped barking. The dog now observed everything with unusual intensity, as if waiting for something only he could sense. Night fell over Greenfield, bringing with it a dense fog that seemed to envelop the town in a cloak of mystery. The residents retreated to their homes, leaving the streets deserted, except for one solitary figure, Thunder, sitting in front of the Smith's house, his eyes fixed on the window of the room where John's body lay. The bark that once echoed through the town had transformed into a vigilant silence, as if the dog guarded a secret that was about to change the fate of everyone in Greenfield. The day dawned cloudy in Greenfield, as if the sky itself wept for the loss of John Smith. Preparations for the wake began early, with neighbors and friends arriving at the Smith's house to offer comfort and help. Mary, with eyes swollen from crying, received condolences mechanically, her gaze lost in some distant point. Beside her, Sarah, her 18-year-old daughter, tried to be strong for her mother, but her own pain was evident in the trembling of her hands and the paleness of her face. The coffin was placed in the living room, surrounded by wildflowers picked from the fields John so loved. A portrait of the deceased, smiling amidst his crops, was positioned on the table, reminding everyone of the vitality that once inhabited that now motionless body. As the townspeople took turns paying their last respects, Thunder remained outside the house, restless. The dog alternated between moments of extreme agitation and periods of silent observation, his eyes never leaving the residence's door. As the day progressed, hushed conversations began to circulate among those present. Some commented on John's sudden departure. Others recalled moments shared with the beloved farmer. However, one particular topic began to gain traction: Thunder's strange behavior. "Have you seen how the dog is acting?" whispered Mrs. Johnson, the town's seamstress, to a small group gathered in the corner of the room. "I've never seen an animal so disturbed." "It's grief," replied Mr. Baker, the baker, shaking his head sorrowfully. "Animals feel loss as much as we do," but not everyone was convinced. Emily, the young local schoolteacher, observed Thunder with growing curiosity. "There's something different about this," she murmured, more to herself than to others. "It's as if he's trying to tell us something." Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Mary was receiving a visit from Father Michael, the local parish priest. The clergyman tried to offer words of comfort, but something in his demeanor seemed troubled. "Mary," he began hesitantly, "I know it's not the right time, but John mentioned something strange the last time I saw him." The widow raised her eyes, a spark of interest crossing her grief-numbed expression. "He talked about a bitter taste in the well water," continued the priest. "Said he was worried, that something wasn't right." Before Mary could respond, a commotion from the living room interrupted the conversation. Thunder's barks, which until then had been occasional, had transformed into a desperate and incessant howl. Everyone rushed to see what was happening. The dog, who had somehow managed to get into the house, was now beside the coffin, barking furiously and scratching at the wood. "Get that animal out of here!" someone shouted, horrified by the scene. But Emily, the young teacher, prevented them from removing Thunder. "Wait!" she exclaimed. "Look at him, he's trying to tell us something." Silence fell over the room as everyone observed the dog. Thunder alternated between frantic barks and moments when he placed his muzzle against the coffin, as if listening for something. It was then that Sarah, John's daughter, noticed a detail that made her heart race. "Look!" she cried, pointing at the coffin. "The wood! It's moving." Indeed, there was an almost imperceptible vibration in the coffin lid. It was as if something or someone was moving inside. Panic spread through the room. Some backed away, horrified, while others drew closer, incredulous. Mary, emerging from her stupor, advanced towards the coffin, her eyes wide with hope and fear. "Open it!" she shouted, her voice laden with an emotion that went beyond grief. "For God's sake, open the coffin!" At that moment, as trembling hands rushed to meet Mary's desperate plea, the fate of John Smith and all of Greenfield was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. Thunder's bark, which was previously seen as a nuisance, now echoed like an alert, a call to the truth that was about to be revealed. And as the coffin lid began to be lifted, the residents of Greenfield held their breath, not knowing they were about to witness a miracle that would change their lives forever. The creaking of wood echoed through the silent room as the coffin lid was slowly raised. The eyes of all present were fixed on that point, a mixture of fear and hope pulsating in every heart. When the lid was finally removed, a collective gasp of astonishment filled the room. John Smith, the man everyone believed to be dead, was moving. His eyes blinked, confused, as he tried to sit up. Mary was the first to react, throwing herself over her husband with a cry of joy and disbelief. "John, my God, John, you're alive!" The scene that followed was one of pure chaos. Some residents ran out of the house, shouting about miracles and resurrection. Others drew closer, wanting to touch John to make sure they weren't dreaming. Thunder, amidst the confusion, jumped and barked, his tail wagging frantically. Dr. Thompson, who was present at the wake, pushed through the crowd to reach John. His face was pale, a mixture of shock and shame evident in his features. "Impossible," he muttered, checking John's vital signs. "I examined him. There was no pulse, no breathing." John, still disoriented, looked around with a confused expression. What happened? Why am I here?" Sarah, crying with joy, held her father's hand. "Dad, we thought you had died," Dr. Thompson said. "Catalepsy," interrupted Emily, the young teacher, her voice trembling with excitement. "It must have been a case of deep catalepsy. I read about it once. It's a state that mimics death." The murmur in the room increased. People discussed animatedly, some talking about divine miracles, others speculating about medical explanations. But for John and his family, none of that mattered at that moment. They were reunited, embracing, crying and laughing at the same time, grateful for this unexpected return to life. Father Michael, observing the scene with teary eyes, raised his hands to the sky. "It's a miracle," he declared. "God has shown us his power and his mercy." As John was helped out of the coffin, supported by Mary and Sarah, Thunder didn't leave his side, licking his hand and wagging his tail as if to say, "I knew it all along." Dr. Thompson, still visibly shaken, insisted that John be taken immediately to the hospital in the neighboring town. "We need to run tests, understand what happened," he argued, the guilt evident in his voice. As they prepared John for transport, the residents of Greenfield crowded outside the house, anxious for news. The story of the man who came back from death spread quickly, and soon journalists from nearby towns began to arrive, drawn by the extraordinary tale. Amidst the commotion, Emily pulled Sarah aside. "Sarah," she whispered, "did your father mention anything about a strange taste in the water before all this happened?" Sarah frowned, trying to remember. "I think so. He commented something about the well a few days ago. Why?" Emily bit her lip, hesitant. It might be nothing, but what if there's more to this story than we're seeing? Before Sarah could respond, they were interrupted by Mary, who was calling her daughter to accompany John to the hospital. The two exchanged a significant look before Sarah moved away. As the ambulance departed, carrying John and his family, the rest of the townspeople remained at the Smiths' house, discussing the surprising events of the night. No one noticed when Thunder quietly slipped away, heading to the backyard. The dog began to sniff the ground intently, focusing on an area near the old well on the property. Night was falling over Greenfield, but the darkness couldn't dim the light of hope and mystery that now enveloped the town. The miracle of John Smith's resurrection was just the beginning. Buried secrets were about to come to light, and a dog's loyalty would be the key to unraveling a plot more complex than anyone could imagine. In the days that followed John Smith's miraculous return, Greenfield was gripped by an atmosphere of excitement and speculation. The small town, previously known only for its beautiful landscapes and tranquility, was now at the center of regional media attention. Journalists roamed the dirt roads, interviewing residents and seeking details about the man who had resurrected. John remained in the hospital of the neighboring town, undergoing a series of exams and tests. Mary and Sarah took turns staying with him and returning to the town to take care of the property and Thunder, who seemed more agitated than ever. In Greenfield's Central Square, groups of residents gathered daily to discuss the latest news. Theories about what had really happened to John varied wildly. "It was a divine miracle. There's no other explanation," insisted Mrs. Johnson, clutching her rosary tightly. "Nonsense," retorted Mr. Baker, the baker. "It was a medical error, that's what it was. Doctor, Thompson should lose his license for such a mistake." Emily, the young teacher, listened to the discussions with growing concern. Something in the story didn't fit, and she couldn't help but think about the conversation she had with Sarah about the strange taste in the well water. Emily, determined to investigate further, began asking discreet questions to the residents about the days leading up to John's incident. Her inquiries led her to Mr. Wilson, the Smiths' closest neighbor. "Mr. Wilson," Emily asked cautiously, "did you notice anything strange in the days before before the incident?" The old farmer scratched his grey beard thoughtfully. "Now that you mention it, there was something. I saw a strange car parked near the Smiths' property a couple of nights before. I thought about asking John, but I ended up forgetting." This information intrigued Emily even more. Who could the mysterious visitor be? And why would they be lurking around the Smiths' property? Meanwhile, at the hospital, John was beginning to recover his memories of the days before his supposed death. One afternoon, while Mary was napping in the chair next to the bed, he called Sarah closer. "Daughter," whispered John, "there's something I need to tell you. Before all this happened, I had an argument with Richard." Sarah frowned. Richard was the owner of the neighboring farm, known for his controversial agricultural methods and difficult personality. "What kind of argument, Dad?" John hesitated. "He wanted to buy part of our land, said he had plans to expand his plantation. When I refused, he got furious. He threatened that I would regret it." Sarah's heart raced. Could there be a connection between this threat and the strange incident with her father? Back in Greenfield, Thunder continued his unusual behavior. The dog spent hours digging in the yard near the well, occasionally barking as if calling someone to see his discovery. It was on one of these afternoons that Emily, passing by the Smiths' property, noticed the dog's agitation. Curious, she approached the spot where Thunder was frantically digging. "What have you found, boy?" Emily murmured, kneeling beside the hole. Her eyes widened when she saw something glinting in the disturbed earth. With trembling hands, she dug a little more and pulled out the object. It was a small glass vial, partially buried. The liquid inside the vial had a strange coloration and a strong smell that made Emily wrinkle her nose. Her heart raced as she realized she might be holding a crucial piece of the puzzle. At that moment, a noise made her turn abruptly. Richard, the neighbor mentioned by John, was standing a few meters away, observing her with an indecipherable expression. "What do you think you're doing on the Smiths' property?" he asked, his voice laden with suspicion. Emily quickly hid the vial in her pocket. Just checking on Thunder," she stammered. "Mary asked me to look in on him while she's at the hospital." Richard narrowed his eyes, clearly unconvinced. "Well, since you're here, you can tell John when he gets back that I'm still interested in buying part of his land. Tell him to reconsider my offer, for everyone's sake." With those enigmatic words, Richard turned and left, leaving Emily with a knot in her stomach and 1,000 questions in her mind. As night fell over Greenfield, the day's events cast a shadow of doubt over the miracle everyone had celebrated. What had really happened to John Smith? What was the secret hidden in the vial found by Thunder? And what was Richard's role in this whole story? The answers to these questions were about to shake the foundations of the quiet town, revealing that even in the most tranquil places, dark secrets can hide beneath the surface. John Smith's return to Greenfield was marked by a mixture of joy and apprehension. While most residents gathered to welcome the man who cheated death, there was an underlying tension that couldn't be ignored. John, still pale and visibly thinner, walked supported by Mary and Sarah. His eyes scanned the familiar faces with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. The time in the hospital had not only restored his health, but also sharpened his suspicions about what had really happened. Emily, who observed the scene from afar, felt the weight of the vial in her pocket like lead. She knew she needed to share her discovery with John and his family, but the time and place had to be right. That night, after most visitors had left, Emily knocked on the Smiths' door. It was Sarah who answered, her tired eyes lighting up at the sight of her friend. "Emily, I'm so glad you came. Please come in." In the living room, John was sitting in his favorite armchair with Thunder faithfully lying at his feet. The dog raised his head, his ears moving in recognition when Emily entered. "Mr. Smith," Emily began, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to show you." Carefully, she took the vial from her pocket and placed it on the coffee table. The reaction was immediate. John leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the object, while Mary let out an exclamation of surprise. "Where did you find this?" asked John, his voice a mixture of shock and contained anger. Emily explained about Thunder's strange behavior and how she had discovered the vial buried in the yard. When she mentioned the encounter with Richard, John's face paled even more. "I knew it," he muttered. "I knew Richard was involved in this somehow." It was then that John shared with everyone the details of his discussion with Richard about selling the land and the subsequent threat. The room fell silent, each person absorbing the implications of what was being revealed. "But what's in this vial?" asked Mary, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm not sure," Emily replied, "but from the smell and appearance I suspect it might be some kind of poison or toxic substance." The word poison hung in the air, heavy and threatening. The possibility that someone had tried to poison Jack was almost unbearable to consider. "We need to take this to the police," said Anna, her voice firm despite the fear evident in her eyes. Jack shook his head slowly. "Not yet. We don't have concrete evidence against August. If we accuse him without solid proof, he might escape or worse, retaliate." "Then what do we do?" asked Mary, holding her husband's hand tightly. Jack was silent for a moment, his eyes moving from the vial to Thunder and back to his family. Finally, he spoke. "We'll investigate on our own. Emily, you've already done so much for us, but I need to ask for one more favor. Can you help us find out more about this vial and its contents?" Emily nodded without hesitation. "Of course, Mr. Jack. I have a friend in the city who works in a laboratory. I can ask him to analyze the contents discreetly." "Great," said Jack. "Meanwhile, we need to keep our eyes open. August might try something again, especially now that he knows I'm alive and well." The meeting ended with an action plan drawn up, but the air in the Silver House was heavy with concern. As Emily prepared to leave, Anna accompanied her to the door. "Emily," whispered Anna, "be careful. If August finds out you're involved..." Emily squeezed her friend's hand reassuringly. "Don't worry. I'll be discreet." When Emily left, night had fallen completely over Green Hill. The streets were deserted, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Somewhere in the darkness, secrets waited to be revealed, and the truth about what really happened to Jack Silver was about to come to light for better or worse. Meanwhile, on the neighboring farm, a solitary light shone in the window of August's office. The man was hunched over a pile of papers, his face a mask of worry and calculation. Jack's return had complicated his plans, but August was not a man to give up easily. With a heavy sigh, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Hello," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We have a problem. The plan didn't work as expected. We need to meet." The web of intrigue in Green Hill was about to become even more complex, and no one was safe from the revelations that dawn would bring. The sun had barely risen when Emily left for the neighboring town, the vial carefully wrapped in her bag. She had spent the night researching toxic substances and their effects, but nothing seemed to fit perfectly with what had happened to Jack. Meanwhile, at the Silver House, Jack decided it was time to face his demons. Leaning on a cane and accompanied by Thunder, he headed to the border of his property with August's. The old well, the center of all the controversy, was right on that border. Jack approached it, his eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of disturbance. "What are you doing here, Jack?" August's voice caught him by surprise. The neighbor emerged from among the trees, his face a mask of false concern. Jack straightened up, facing August's gaze. "I came to take a closer look at the place where I almost lost my life," he replied, his voice laden with veiled accusation. August shrugged, a forced smile on his lips. "An unfortunate incident, no doubt, but you're fine now, aren't you? A true miracle." "Miracle?" Jack laughed humorlessly. "Or would it be the failure of a carefully crafted plan?" August's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Be careful what you're insinuating, Jack. Serious accusations require serious evidence." Before Jack could respond, Thunder began barking furiously, running towards a spot a few meters beyond the well. The two men watched, tense, as the dog dug frantically. In the city, Emily anxiously waited, while her friend, a young chemist named Richard, analyzed the contents of the vial. "Emily, this is concerning," said Richard, removing his protective glasses. "This substance is a rare compound, difficult to detect in common tests. In small doses, it causes symptoms that can be easily confused with a temporary cardiac arrest." Emily's heart raced. "So someone really tried to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Richard nodded gravely. "Yes, and whoever it is, they have advanced knowledge of chemistry. This is not a common poison." Back at the Silver property, Thunder had finally stopped digging. Jack approached cautiously, August right behind him, both driven by tense curiosity. At the bottom of the hole was something that made Jack's blood run cold. A small accounting book, its pages stained with dirt and moisture. "This is—" August began, but abruptly fell silent. Jack picked up the book with trembling hands. As he opened it, his eyes widened in shock. There, in black and white, were records of illegal transactions, money laundering schemes, and most shockingly, a detailed plan to acquire the lands of small farmers in Green Hill, including the Silver property. "So that's it," Jack muttered, his voice trembling with anger. "It wasn't just about my land, was it?" August, his face a mask of fury and fear, took a threatening step towards Jack. "Give me that now, Jack. You have no idea what you're messing with." But before either man could make a move, the sound of sirens cut through the air. Police cars were rapidly approaching on the dirt road. Emily jumped out of Richard's car as soon as he stopped, running towards Jack and August. "Jack," she shouted, "we have the evidence, the substance in the vial." Her voice died as she saw the scene before her. Jack holding a dusty book, August with an expression of pure panic, and Thunder growling threateningly at the neighbor. The police quickly surrounded the area. The sheriff, a middle-aged man with keen eyes, approached. "We received an anonymous tip about suspicious activities on this property," he announced. "Can someone tell me what's going on here?" Jack looked at Emily, then at the book in his hands, and finally at August, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes. "Sheriff," Jack began slowly, "I think we have a long story to tell." As Jack began to recount the events of the past few days, Thunder sat down next to his owner, vigilant as always. The dog who had saved Jack's life with his unwavering loyalty now witnessed the unfolding of a plot that went far beyond a simple land dispute. The truth was finally coming to light in Green Hill, and with it, the promise of justice and the hope for a new beginning. But as the revelations unfolded, it became clear that the path to redemption would be long and full of obstacles. The sheriff's office had never been so busy. Jack, Mary, Anna, Emily, and even Thunder, who refused to leave his owner's side, were present, along with several officers coming and going, carrying piles of documents and evidence. August was in a separate interrogation room, his lawyer having arrived in a hurry from a neighboring town. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the weight of the revelations that were about to come to light. "So, Mr. Silver," began the sheriff, leafing through the accounting book found by Thunder, "you're saying that this book contains evidence of a much larger scheme than just an attempt to acquire your land?" Jack nodded gravely. "Yes, Sheriff. From what I could see, August was involved in a scheme to acquire not only my property, but several others in Green Hill. And there are indications of money laundering and other illegal activities. Emily cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. Additionally, Sheriff, we have the results of the analysis of the substance found in the vial. She handed Richard's report to the sheriff. It's a rare compound, capable of simulating a temporary cardiac arrest. Sheriff Oliveira read the report, his face becoming increasingly serious. This is very grave. Attempted homicide, large-scale fraud. We're dealing with a much more complex case than we initially imagined. At that moment, a young police officer hurriedly entered the room. Sheriff, we found something in August's financial records. There are suspicious transactions involving a company called Green Future Enterprises. It appears to be a shell company. The name made Jack start. Green Future. But that's the company that has been pressuring several farmers in the region to sell their lands. They claim to be interested in developing sustainable agriculture projects. Anna, who had been silent until then, spoke up. Dad, remember that representative who came to visit us a few months ago? He mentioned this company. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Sheriff Oliveira stood up, his expression determined. We need to expand our investigation. This goes far beyond Green Hill. We're possibly dealing with a statewide operation, maybe even national. As the sheriff gave orders for his team to initiate a broader investigation, Mary held Jack's hand, her tears mixing relief and concern. Jack, what if they try something again? What if it's not safe for us to stay here? Jack squeezed his wife's hand, his voice firm despite the evident fatigue. We won't let ourselves be intimidated, Mary. This land is our home, our legacy. We've fought hard for it and we won't give up now. Emily, overhearing the conversation, approached the couple. Mr. Jack, Mrs. Mary, you're not alone in this fight. All of Green Hill is behind you. And now that the truth is coming out, I'm sure other farmers in the region will join us. Sheriff Oliveira, after finishing giving instructions to his team, turned his attention back to the Silva family. I'm going to assign a team to protect your property 24 hours a day, at least until we resolve this situation. And I'll need all of you to give formal statements in the coming days. As night fell over Green Hill, news of the events spread rapidly. Groups of residents gathered in the central square, discussing the events in excited voices. The small village, which had always been a place of peace and tranquility, now found itself at the center of a scandal that threatened to shake the power structures of the region. At the Silva house, the family gathered around the kitchen table, sharing a simple meal, but one charged with emotion. Thunder, as always, was by Jack's side, his presence a constant reminder of how everything began and how the loyalty and instinct of an animal had been fundamental in unraveling the entire plot. What happens now? Asked Anna, expressing the doubt that lingered in everyone's mind. Jack looked at each member of his family before answering. Now, my daughter, we fight. We fight for the truth, for justice, and for the future of Green Hill. This land is not just ours, it's the home of everyone who lives here, and we'll defend that home with everything we have. Jack's words echoed through the kitchen, carrying with them a promise of difficult days ahead, but also of hope. The battle was far from over, but the Silvers and the residents of Green Hill were ready to face whatever came, united by truth and love for their land. Outside, the stars shone over the fields, silent witnesses to a story that was just beginning to be told. And somewhere in the darkness, the echoes of a distant bark seemed to remind everyone that sometimes the most unlikely heroes can be those who cannot speak, but whose hearts beat with unwavering loyalty. The days that followed in Green Hill were filled with intense activity. The small village, once known for its tranquility, now buzzed with the constant presence of police officers, journalists, and curious onlookers from neighboring towns. Jack and his family found themselves at the center of a media hurricane. Reporters camped out in front of their property, eager for a statement or a photo of the man who had come back from the dead and exposed a criminal scheme. Emily, with her background in journalism, involuntarily became the unofficial spokesperson for the Silva family. She worked tirelessly to protect Jack and his family's privacy while keeping the community informed about the case's developments. On a particularly hectic afternoon, Emily organized an impromptu press conference in Green Hill's central square. Representatives from various media outlets crowded around, their cameras and microphones pointed at the hastily assembled small podium. "Good afternoon, everyone," Emily began, her voice steady despite her evident nervousness. "On behalf of the Silver family and the Green Hill community, I thank you all for being here. As you know, in recent weeks, our quiet village has found itself at the center of an investigation that has revealed a scheme of corruption and attempted murder." As Emily spoke, Jack watched from afar, hidden on the porch of his house. His heart swelled with gratitude for the young teacher who had become such an important ally. "Jack," Mary called softly, placing her hand on her husband's shoulder, "we have a visitor." As he turned, Jack saw Sheriff Oliveira standing in the living room, his serious demeanor indicating he brought important news. "Mr. Silver," the sheriff began, "we have updates on the investigation. Green Future Enterprises is just the tip of the iceberg. We've uncovered connections to influential politicians and businessmen throughout the state. This case is much bigger than we initially thought." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "What does this mean for us, Sheriff? For Green Hill?" The sheriff sighed heavily. "It means you're facing powerful adversaries. I've received pressure to drop the case, bribe offers, veiled threats. But I want you to know that I'm on your side. We're going to see this through no matter what it costs." At that moment, Anna came running into the room, her face pale with concern. "Dad, Mum, you need to see this." She turned on the television, tuning to a local news channel. The headline made everyone's blood run cold. "Scandal in Green Hill. Crucial evidence disappears from police department." The reporter, with a grave expression, stated, "Sources claim that the accounting book and other evidence related to the Silver case were stolen from the evidence room. Authorities have not yet officially commented on the incident." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack, Mary, and Anna looked at each other, stunned. Sheriff Oliveira, visibly shaken, was already on the phone, demanding explanations from his subordinates. Outside, the sound of the press conference was interrupted by a growing murmur. Emily, sensing something was wrong, abruptly ended the interview and ran towards the Silver house. Thunder, who had been lying calmly at Jack's feet, suddenly stood up, his ears perked and a low growl escaping his throat. He ran to the window, barking furiously at something or someone outside. Jack, moved by an instinct he couldn't explain, followed the dog. Looking out the window, he saw a dark car parked across the street, its tinted windows preventing him from seeing who was inside. For a brief moment, the driver's window lowered, and Jack glimpsed a familiar face, one of the men who had visited his property months ago, claiming to represent Green Future Enterprises. The car suddenly sped off, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and a palpable sense of threat. Emily entered the house, breathless, her eyes wide with concern. "Jack, Mary, are you all right? What's going on?" Jack turned to face his family, the sheriff and Emily. His expression was a mixture of determination and concern. "It seems the storm we've been fearing has finally arrived, but we won't back down. This is our home, our land, our truth, and we'll fight for it to the end." As the sun set over Green Hill, casting long shadows across the fields, the Silver family and their allies prepared to face what promised to be the fight of their lives. The truth was at stake, and with it, the future of an entire community. Thunder, sensing the tension in the air, positioned himself protectively beside Jack, as if to say, "I'm here. No matter what comes, we'll face it together." And so, with night falling and uncertainties looming in the air, the inhabitants of Green Hill prepared for the challenges that dawn would bring. The fight for justice and truth was just beginning, and no one knew exactly where it would lead them. The following morning dawned grey in Green Hill, as if the sky itself reflected the somber atmosphere that hung over the village. The news of the disappearance of evidence spread quickly, casting a shadow of doubt and fear over the community. Jack, determined not to be discouraged, called an emergency meeting at his house. Besides his family, Emily, Sheriff Oliveira, and to everyone's surprise, Father Thomas were present. "Friends," Jack began, his voice tired but firm, "we face a challenge that will test each of us. Our enemies are powerful and won't hesitate to use every means to silence us. But we have something they don't, the truth and the support of our community." Emily, who had spent the night researching and making calls, spoke up. "I managed to contact some journalists from larger outlets. They're interested in our story. The more exposure we give this case, the harder it will be for them to cover it up." Sheriff Oliveira nodded, adding, "I'm working with my contacts in the capital. There are honest people in the system who want to see justice done. We're not alone in this fight." It was then that Father Thomas surprised everyone. "My children," he said, his grave voice echoing through the room. "I spent the night in prayer seeking guidance, and now I know that I can no longer remain silent." He took a deep breath before continuing. "For years, I have heard confessions and rumors about the shady activities of certain influential members of our community. I always remained neutral, believing that my role was only to offer spiritual comfort. But now I see that silence can sometimes be a form of complicity." A stunned silence fell over the room. Jack was the first to speak. "Father, are you saying you have information that can help us?" The priest nodded solemnly. "I have names, dates, places. Information that, although it can't be used legally due to the confessional seal, can guide us in the right direction." The priest's revelation injected new energy into the group. They quickly began to devise strategies, combining the priest's information with the evidence they already had and Emily's media contacts. As they discussed, Thunder, who had been lying calmly at Jack's feet, suddenly stood up, his ears perked. He ran to the window, barking insistently. Jack, now accustomed to trusting the dog's instincts, went to check. Outside, he saw a familiar figure hesitantly approaching the house. It was Robert, August's assistant. "What's he doing here?" Anna muttered, distrust evident in her voice. Jack, after a moment of reflection, decided, "Let's hear him out. Maybe he can provide us with more pieces of this puzzle." Robert was invited in, his nervousness palpable as he faced the assembled group. "Mr. Jack," he began, his voice trembling, I can't take it anymore. The weight on my conscience is too great." In the minutes that followed, Robert poured out a torrent of information. He revealed details about August's operations, names of involved politicians and businessmen, and even the location of a safe where incriminating documents were kept. "I didn't know how deep this went," Robert confessed, his voice choked. "When I realized the extent of the scheme and what they did to you, Mr. Jack, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Sheriff Oliveira, who had listened attentively, spoke up. "Robert, you understand that by providing us with this information, you're implicating yourself as well? You'll have to give a formal statement." Robert nodded, resigned. "I know, and I'm willing to face the consequences. It's the least I can do to try to fix part of the harm I helped cause." Jack, moved by a mixture of compassion and caution, approached Robert. "Your courage in coming here is admirable, but understand that we'll need to verify every piece of information you've given us." Emily, who had been furiously taking notes of everything Robert said, looked up from her notebook. "This changes everything. With this information, we can not only expose the scheme, but also push for a state or even federal-level investigation." Father Thomas, who had been silent, reflecting on everything he had heard, finally spoke. "My children, I see the hand of God at work here. Through the loyalty of a dog, the courage of a community, and now the redemption of a repentant man, the truth is finding its way to the light." As the group discussed the next steps, Thunder approached Robert, cautiously sniffing him. To everyone's surprise, the dog, after a moment of consideration, lay down at the newcomer's feet, as if offering his own seal of approval. Anna, observing the scene, couldn't suppress a smile. "It seems Thunder approves of our new ally," she commented, easing some of the tension in the room. With the new information in hand, the group began to outline a bold plan. Emily would use her media contacts to prepare a major exposure of the case. Sheriff Oliveira would coordinate a police operation based on Robert's information. And Father Thomas offered to use his moral influence in the community to gather support and additional testimonies. Jack, looking at the group assembled in his living room, his family, loyal friends, and even a former enemy, now turned ally, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. "I never imagined our little green hill would become the epicenter of such a big fight," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "But looking at all of you, I know there's no place I'd rather be, nor people I'd rather fight alongside." Mary took her husband's hand, her eyes shining with determination. "Together, we're stronger than any scheme or conspiracy." As the sun began to set, casting golden rays through the windows of the Silver House, the group continued to plan and discuss. The battle ahead would be difficult, but now they had renewed hope and unexpected allies. Outside, the fields of Green Hill seemed to whisper promises of better days. And Thunder, the faithful guardian who had started this whole journey with his insistent barking, watched everyone with his wise eyes, as if he knew that no matter how dark the night, dawn always brought with it the promise of a new day. The fight for truth and justice in Green Hill was far from over, but with each new ally, with each piece of information revealed, the light of hope shone a little brighter. And in that room, surrounded by those who cared deeply about truth and the common good, Jack knew that no matter the final outcome, they had already achieved something precious: the unity of a community willing to stand up against injustice. The days that followed were marked by intense preparation in Green Hill. The Silver House transformed into an improvised headquarters, with Emily, Sheriff Oliveira, and other allies constantly coming and going, always under Thunder's watchful eye. Jack, though still physically recovering, was at the center of everything, coordinating efforts and keeping morale high. His experience as a farmer, accustomed to facing nature's adversities, now proved valuable in a battle of a very different nature. Emily, working tirelessly, had secured the interest of a renowned investigative journalist from the capital. "He'll arrive tomorrow," she informed the group during one of their meetings. "If we can provide concrete evidence, he promises a national report that will shake the power structures." Sheriff Oliveira, in turn, was assembling a team of trusted police officers. "We need to act quickly and in a coordinated manner," he explained. "As soon as we have the warrant, we'll conduct simultaneous searches at multiple locations." Robert, now under police protection, provided crucial details about August's operations and his associates. Maps, passwords, routines. Every piece of information was a vital part of the puzzle they were assembling. On the eve of the operation, dubbed Operation Dawn by the group, Jack gathered everyone in his living room. The atmosphere was charged with tension and expectation. "Friends," Jack began, his voice firm despite the evident fatigue in his eyes, "tomorrow we'll face the greatest challenge of our lives. We're not just fighting for Green Hill, but for all communities that suffer at the hands of greedy and unscrupulous people." Mary, by her husband's side, added, "Regardless of the outcome, we should be proud of having stood up against injustice. Our unity is our greatest strength." Father Thomas, who was present, offered a brief prayer asking for protection and wisdom for all involved in the operation. As the group began to disperse, preparing for the long night ahead, Anna noticed something strange. "Where's Thunder?" she asked, noticing the faithful dog's absence. Jack frowned, concerned. Thunder rarely strayed, especially in moments of tension. "Let's look for him," he said, an uneasy feeling forming in his chest. The group spread out across the property, calling for Thunder. It was Emily who finally found him, near the old well. The dog was agitated, barking and digging frantically. "Jack," Emily shouted, "I think Thunder found something." Everyone gathered around the well. Jack, remembering how it all began with Thunder's insistent barking, felt a shiver run down his spine. "Let's see what he found," he said, grabbing a shovel. After a few minutes of digging, something metallic reflected the flashlight's beam. Carefully, Jack unearthed a small safe. "My God," Robert whispered, his eyes wide. "It's August's personal safe. He always carried the key with him, but I never knew where he hid it." Sheriff Oliveira examined the safe. "It's locked, but we can open it with a warrant. If the contents are what we suspect, we'll have the final proof we need," Emily completed, barely containing her excitement. Jack knelt beside Thunder, stroking the faithful friend's fur. "Once again, you've saved us, boy. I don't know how, but you always know where to look." At that moment, as the group observed the safe with a mixture of hope and apprehension, a distant howl echoed through the night. It was as if nature itself was announcing that the tide was about to turn. "Tomorrow," said Jack, his voice laden with determination, "when the sun rises over Green Hill, it will be the beginning of a new day. Not just for us, but for all those who dream of justice and truth." And so, with Thunder by his side and the mysterious safe in their hands, the group returned to the house, preparing for the battle that dawn would bring. Operation Dawn was about to begin, and with it the fate of Green Hill and all involved would be sealed. The night progressed, but no one could sleep. In every house, in every heart, hope and fear mingled, as everyone awaited the sunrise that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in the history of their beloved village. Dawn in Green Hill was different that day. A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional bird song and the distant sound of engines, police forces strategically positioning themselves around the village. At the Silver House, the central group of the operation gathered for final preparations. Jack, with Thunder faithfully by his side, observed a map of the region spread out on the kitchen table, where Sheriff Oliveira marked the points of action. "At 7 a.m. sharp, we'll begin simultaneous searches," the sheriff explained. "We have teams ready to enter August's farm, the Green Future Enterprises office in the neighboring town, and 3 other suspicious locations." Emily, who had spent the night in contact with her journalist ally, added, "The reporting team is on standby. As soon as we have the first concrete evidence, they'll go on air with the story." Father Thomas, who had decided to accompany the operation to offer moral support, said in a solemn voice, "I prayed all night for everyone's safety and for the triumph of truth. May God guide us on this crucial day." At 6:55 a.m., the group left the house. The tension was palpable. Curious neighbors peeked through windows, sensing that something important was about to happen. Exactly at 7 a.m., the morning silence was broken by the sound of sirens and moving vehicles. Operation Dawn had begun. Jack, accompanied by Emily, Sheriff Oliveira, and a police team headed to August's farm. Thunder, as always, was by his owner's side, alert and protective. Upon arrival, they found the farm gates locked. "Federal police!" shouted the sheriff. "We have a search and seizure warrant." For a few tense moments, there was no response. Then, slowly, the gates began to open. August appeared, his face a mask of contained fury. "This is absurd," he vociferated. "You have no right." Sheriff Oliveira, impassive, presented the warrant. "We have every right, Mr. August, and I suggest you cooperate fully." As the police team began the searches, Jack couldn't help but notice the look of defeat in August's eyes. It was the look of a man who knew his empire was crumbling. The following hours were filled with intense activity. Documents were seized, computers confiscated, and to everyone's surprise, a secret compartment was discovered in August's office, full of incriminating evidence. Emily, working tirelessly, coordinated the flow of information between the search teams and the journalists. With each new discovery, the story gained more substance and impact. At noon, the first report aired on national television. The images of the operation in Green Hill, combined with the evidence found, caused shock throughout the country. The scheme, much larger than initially imagined, involved high-ranking politicians, influential businessmen, and even corrupt judges. In Green Hill's central square, a crowd gathered in front of a large television installed by Father Thomas. The residents watched, stunned, as a plot that had unfolded right under their noses for years was revealed. As the day progressed, more arrests were made. August, his main associates, and several involved politicians were taken into custody. The operation now extended far beyond the limits of Green Hill, with developments in the state capital and even in Brasilia. At dusk, Jack gathered with his family and key allies on the porch of his house. Fatigue was evident on all faces, but there was also a gleam of triumph in their eyes. "We did it," said Jack, his voice choked with emotion. "Thanks to the courage of each one of you, Thunder's loyalty, and the strength of our community, we managed to expose the truth." Mary, with tears in her eyes, hugged her husband. "You almost died for this cause, Jack, but look at what we've achieved." Emily, who had just hung up the phone, approached with a radiant smile. "You won't believe it. The repercussion is enormous. They're talking about creating a parliamentary commission of inquiry to investigate the entire land-grabbing scheme in the country." Sheriff Oliveira, looking years younger despite the exhausting day, added, "This is just the beginning. The investigations will continue for months, maybe years. But the most important thing is that we've taken the first step." As the sun set over Green Hill, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Jack found himself reflecting on the incredible journey they had traveled. From a simple farmer fighting for his land, he had become the catalyst for a change that would echo throughout the country. Thunder, sensing his owner's moment of contemplation, rested his head on Jack's lap. The farmer smiled, stroking the faithful friend's fur. "It all started with you, boy," he murmured, remembering the insistent barking that had triggered this entire journey. As night fell over Green Hill, the small village seemed to vibrate with renewed energy. In the streets, residents gathered in small groups, discussing the day's events and speculating about the future. There was a palpable feeling of pride and hope in the air. At the Silver House, the central group of the operation remained gathered, processing the events and planning the next steps. Emily, still in constant contact with the press, provided regular updates. "The repercussions are enormous," she informed, hanging up the phone for the umpteenth time. "There are already movements in the National Congress to open a parliamentary commission of inquiry on land grabbing and corruption in the agricultural sector." Father Thomas, who had returned after organizing a prayer vigil at the local church, added, "The community is united like never before. Many want to know how they can help with the investigations or support other communities facing similar problems." Anna, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke. "Dad, Mum, do you realize what we've done? It's not just about Green Hill now. It's about giving hope to all the small communities that suffer from greed and corruption." Jack nodded, feeling the weight and importance of the moment. "You're right, daughter. But I also know that this is just the beginning. There will be resistance. Attempts to cover up the case. We need to be prepared." Sheriff Oliveira, who had been on the phone with his superiors, joined the conversation. "Jack is right. I'm already receiving reports of behind-the-scenes movements. Powerful people were hit today and they won't give up easily." Mary, always the voice of practical wisdom, intervened. "Then we need to ensure that this story doesn't die, that it's not just another scandal that's forgotten in a week." Emily emphatically agreed. "Exactly. We need to keep the pressure on, continue providing information to the press, mobilize public opinion." As they discussed strategies for the days and weeks ahead, Thunder suddenly stood up, his ears perked. Seconds later, they heard knocks on the door. Jack went to answer, cautious. To his surprise, it was Robert, August's ex-assistant, accompanied by 2 police officers. "Mr. Jack," Robert began, visibly nervous, I came to say goodbye. I'm entering the witness protection program. Before I leave, I wanted to thank you for giving me the chance to do the right thing and ask forgiveness for my role in all of this." Jack, moved by a wave of compassion, extended his hand to Robert. "You made the right choice in the end, Robert. That's what matters. Take care and good luck." After Robert's departure, the group reflected on how the actions of an individual could have such a significant impact. Each person there had played a crucial role in this journey for truth and justice. As the night progressed, the allies began to disperse, exhausted but satisfied. Promises were made to meet again in the morning to continue the work. Jack and his family were finally alone. Sitting on the porch under a starry sky, they absorbed the magnitude of the day's events. "You know," said Jack, breaking the contemplative silence, "when all of this started, I just wanted to protect our land, our home. I never imagined we'd end up unleashing something so big." Mary took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "That's how great changes happen, my love. They start with one person standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." Anna, looking at the horizon where the village lights twinkled, added, "And now, Green Hill will be remembered, not just for its beauty, but for its courage." Thunder, sensing the solemn moment, let out a low, melodious howl, as if sealing that moment in history. As the Silver family prepared for their first night of true rest in weeks, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promises of a new dawn. Green Hill, the small village that dared to challenge the powerful, had become a symbol of hope and resistance. And so, with hearts full of gratitude and renewed determination, Jack, Mary, Anna, and the faithful Thunder retired, knowing that the next day would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to fight for what is right. The months that followed Operation Dawn were filled with intense activity and transformation, not just for Green Hill, but for the entire country. The small village, once known only for its tranquility and natural beauty, had become a national symbol of resistance and the fight against corruption. Jack and his family, along with Emily, Sheriff Oliveira, and Father Thomas, found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of events. Public hearings, testimonies, interviews, their lives had completely transformed. On a sunny spring morning, exactly 1 year after the day Thunder had started barking frantically at Jack's coffin, the Silver family gathered on their porch for a special breakfast. Everyone was there: Jack, Mary, Anna, Emily, who was now considered part of the family, Sheriff Oliveira, and Father Thomas. And of course Thunder lying at Jack's feet as always. "Who would have thought," Jack began, looking at the assembled group, "that a year ago we'd be here after everything we've been through?" Mary smiled, serving coffee to everyone. "It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?" Emily, who was now a nationally recognized journalist for her work in exposing the case, added, "And what a journey." The Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry on Land Grabbing has already resulted in dozens of arrests and changes in legislation. Sheriff Oliveira nodded, his face showing the fatigue of months of intense investigations, but also a deep satisfaction. The Green Hill case opened the doors for us to investigate similar schemes across the country. There's still a lot of work ahead, but we've taken a giant step. Anna, who in recent months had become a passionate activist for small farmers' rights, shared her perspective. The most incredible thing is seeing how other communities have been inspired by our story. I receive messages daily from people who are organizing to fight for their lands and their rights. Father Thomas, with his serene smile, offered a reflection. All of this makes me think about the power of truth and unity. When good people come together for a just cause, there's no force in the world that can stop them. As they talked, reminiscing about the crucial moments of that incredible journey, Thunder suddenly stood up, his ears perked. Everyone fell silent, remembering how the dog's instincts had been crucial so many times. But this time Thunder simply wagged his tail and ran to the gate. Outside, a group of children from the village was passing by, laughing and waving to the Silver family. Jack couldn't contain an emotional smile. "Look at that," he said. "The children of Green Hill will grow up in a better place because of what we did." Mary took her husband's hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. And not just the children of Green Hill, but from many other places too. Emily, always alert to great stories, proposed, "Have you ever thought about writing a book about all this? The story of how a loyal dog, a brave family, and a united community changed the course of a country?" The idea was received with enthusiasm by everyone. Anna especially got excited about the possibility. "We could use the profits to create a foundation," she suggested, "to help other communities fight against land grabbing." As they discussed the details of this new endeavor, Thunder returned to Jack's side, lying down again at his feet. The farmer bent down to pet his faithful friend, remembering how it all began with his insistent barking. "You know," said Jack, addressing the group but with his eyes fixed on Thunder, "sometimes I wonder if he knew somehow everything that would happen. If he understood the importance of what he was doing that day." Father Thomas smiled. "The ways of destiny are mysterious, my friend. Perhaps Thunder was an instrument of something greater, guiding all of us on this extraordinary journey." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing Green Hill in its golden light, the group remained on the porch, sharing stories, laughter, and plans for the future. The village around them hummed with the activity of a new day, the residents coming and going, their lives forever transformed by the events of the past year. Jack looked to the horizon, to the green fields he loved so much and for which he had fought so hard. He saw not only the beauty of the landscape, but the reflection of a new era, an era of hope, justice, and community. Thunder, as if sensing his owner's thoughts, raised his head and let out a joyful bark. It was a sound of affirmation, of promise, echoing across the fields of Green Hill and beyond, reminding everyone that sometimes the most unlikely heroes, be it a faithful dog or a small community, can change the world. And so under the blue sky of Green Hill, surrounded by those he loved and by the legacy they had created together, Jack knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it united, guided by truth, justice, and the unconditional love that had brought them this far. As the days passed, the impact of Green Hill's story continued to ripple across the nation. The book project, which had started as a simple idea during that celebratory breakfast, had taken on a life of its own. Emily, with her journalistic skills, took the lead in writing, while Anna coordinated interviews and gathered testimonies from villagers and key players in the events. The process of writing the book became a journey of reflection for everyone involved. As they recounted their experiences, they realized just how much they had grown and changed over the past year. Jack, once a simple farmer focused on his own land, had become a respected voice in the national dialogue on land rights and rural communities. Mary, always the pillar of strength for her family, found herself speaking at women's empowerment events, sharing her story of resilience and determination. Anna's passion for activism had blossomed into a full-fledged career. She was now traveling across the country, connecting with other communities facing similar challenges, and helping them organize and fight for their rights. Her experiences were providing invaluable material for the book, showing that Green Hill's story was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger struggle, Sheriff Oliveira, inspired by the positive changes he had witnessed, had initiated a program to train other law enforcement officers in rural areas, focusing on community policing and anti-corruption measures. His efforts were creating a ripple effect of positive change within the police force. Father Thomas, true to his calling, had become a moral compass, not just for Green Hill, but for many other communities. He was often invited to speak at gatherings where he emphasized the importance of ethical leadership and community solidarity. And Emily, through her continued reporting on the aftermath of the Green Hill case, had become one of the most respected investigative journalists in the country. Her unwavering commitment to truth and justice had earned her numerous accolades, but more importantly, it had inspired a new generation of journalists to pursue stories that could make a real difference in people's lives. As for Thunder, he had become something of a local celebrity. Children would often stop by the Silver Farm just to see him, and there was talk of erecting a statue in the town square to honor his role in uncovering the truth. Jack would often chuckle at this, reminding everyone that Thunder was happiest simply being a loyal companion and guardian of the farm. One warm afternoon, as Jack and Thunder were walking the perimeter of their property, they came across a young couple standing at the fence line. The man, looking somewhat nervous, called out to Jack, "Mr. Silver, I'm sorry to bother you, but, well, we've just moved to Green Hill and we wanted to thank you." Jack approached them, curious. "Thank me? What for?" The woman smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "We're from a small village in the north. We were about to lose our land to a big corporation, just like what almost happened here. But then we heard about Green Hill's story. It gave us hope, showed us how to fight back. We managed to keep our land, and now we've moved here to start a new life. Your story changed everything for us." Jack was momentarily speechless, touched by the impact their struggle had had on people he'd never even met. He reached out to shake their hands, feeling a sense of pride and humility wash over him. "Welcome to Green Hill," he said warmly. "I'm glad our story could help you. But remember, it wasn't just me. It was our entire community working together." As the couple walked away, visibly excited to have met Jack in person, he turned to Thunder, who was watching the exchange with his usual calm demeanor. "Well, boy," Jack said, patting Thunder's head, "looks like our little adventure is still changing lives. Who would have thought, huh?" Thunder let out a soft woof as if in agreement, and the two of them continued their walk, the setting sun casting long shadows across the fields of Green Hill. Back at the house, the family was gathered around the kitchen table, poring over the latest draft of the book. Emily was reading aloud a particularly poignant passage about the night of Jack's resurrection and Thunder's pivotal role. And as the coffin lid was lifted, revealing Jack alive and breathing, it became clear that Thunder's persistent barking had been more than just the distress of a loyal pet. It was a clarion call for justice, a voice for those who could not speak for themselves. In that moment, a dog's unwavering faith had set in motion events that would change not just Green Hill, but an entire nation. As Emily finished reading, there was a moment of reflective silence. Mary wiped a tear from her eye, the memory of that night still vivid and emotional. Anna was the first to speak. "It's amazing how it all comes together on paper. Living through it was one thing, but seeing it laid out like this, it really drives home how extraordinary it all was." Jack nodded, his arm around Mary's shoulders. "And to think, it all started with Thunder's instincts. Sometimes I wonder if he knew more than we gave him credit for." As if on cue, Thunder, who had been dozing in the corner, lifted his head and gave a soft whine, his tail thumping gently against the floor. Sheriff Oliveira, who had joined them for dinner, chuckled. "That dog deserves a medal. Heck, he deserves his own chapter in the history books." "Speaking of history," Emily interjected, "I received a call from the National Museum today. They're interested in creating an exhibit about the Green Hill case. They want to showcase documents, photographs, even items like the accounting book we found." This news was met with a mix of excitement and awe. The idea that their story would be preserved in a national museum, educating future generations, was both humbling and inspiring. "We should donate Thunder's collar," Anna suggested with a grin. "After all, he's the real hero of this story." As laughter filled the room, Jack couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. From a family fighting to keep their farm, they had become symbols of a larger movement, their story a beacon of hope for countless others. The conversation continued late into the night, with plans for the book launch, discussions about the foundation they were establishing to help other communities, and dreams for Green Hill's future. Through it all, Thunder remained a constant presence, his watchful eyes and occasional soft barks a reminder of the faithful companion who had started it all. As the family finally began to disperse for the night, Jack lingered in the kitchen, Thunder by his side. He poured himself a glass of water from the tap, remembering with a wry smile how a strange taste in this very water had been one of the first clues in their incredible journey. "You know, Thunder," he said softly, crouching down to the dog's level, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you wouldn't stop barking that day. You saw what none of us could see, and you never gave up. We all owe you more than we can ever repay." Thunder responded by gently licking Jack's hand, his brown eyes full of understanding and loyalty. As Jack stood up, he gazed out the window at the moonlit fields of Green Hill. The village had changed, grown in ways no one could have predicted, but at its heart, it remained the same close-knit community that had banded together in the face of adversity. With a contented sigh, Jack turned off the kitchen light. "Come on, boy," he said to Thunder. "Let's get some rest. Tomorrow's another day, and who knows what adventures it might bring." As they walked up the stairs, Thunder's nails clicking softly on the wood, Jack felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever challenges the future might hold, he knew that with his family, his community, and his faithful dog by his side, they could face anything. And so another day in Green Hill came to an end. But the story of a brave family, a loyal dog, and a community united in the pursuit of justice would continue to inspire and give hope for generations to come. In the quiet of the night, as the stars twinkled over the sleeping village, the promise of a brighter future seemed to hang in the air, a testament to the enduring power of truth, courage, and unwavering loyalty. As the weeks passed, Green Hill continued to evolve, becoming a beacon of hope and a model for community activism across the country. The book about their journey, co-authored by Emily and Anna, had become a national bestseller, inspiring readers far and wide with the tale of their struggle and triumph. One crisp autumn morning, Jack awoke to the sound of excited barking. Thunder was at the bedroom door, his tail wagging furiously. Curious about what had stirred the dog so early, Jack quickly dressed and followed Thunder downstairs and out onto the porch. What he saw took his breath away. A sea of people, hundreds strong, had gathered on the road leading to their farm. They carried banners and signs, but these weren't protesters. Their faces were bright with smiles, and many were waving copies of the book. Mary joined Jack on the porch, her eyes wide with surprise. "Jack, what's going on?" Before he could answer, Emily came running up the path, her face flushed with excitement. "You won't believe it, these people have come from all over the country. They're calling it the Green Hill Pilgrimage. They want to see the place where it all happened, to meet the family and the dog that sparked a national movement." Jack was momentarily speechless. He looked at Thunder, who sat proudly beside him, tail still wagging, as if he understood the magnitude of what was happening. Anna emerged from the house, already in action mode. "Dad, we should welcome them. Maybe we could set up a sort of open house, let people see where everything took place." Jack nodded slowly, still processing the scene before him. "You're right. These people have come a long way. Let's show them some Green Hill hospitality." What followed was a day unlike any other in Green Hill's history. The Silver Farm became an impromptu museum and gathering place. Jack, Mary, Anna, and Emily took turns sharing their story with groups of visitors. People listened with rapt attention, many wiping away tears as they heard first-hand accounts of the struggle and triumph. Thunder, ever the faithful companion, seemed to revel in the attention. Children especially were drawn to him, and he patiently allowed countless little hands to pat his head and scratch behind his ears. As Jack watched the scene unfold, he felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Sheriff Oliveira, looking both amused and a bit overwhelmed. "Quite a turnout, eh, Jack?" the sheriff said with a grin. "I've had to call in officers from neighboring counties just to help with traffic control, but you know what? It's worth it. These people, they're not just here for a story, they're here because you've given them hope." Jack nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "It's incredible, isn't it? I never imagined our little fight would mean so much to so many." As the day wore on, Jack noticed a group of older men and women, their faces weathered by years of working the land, gathered near the old well. Curious, He made his way over to them. One of the men, his eyes moist with unshed tears, reached out to shake Jack's hand. "Mr. Silver," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know that what you did here, it saved our community too. We were facing the same kind of land grab, but your story showed us how to fight back. We won our battle, and it's all thanks to you and your family." Jack was deeply moved. "I'm glad we could help," he said softly, "but remember, it wasn't just us. It was our whole community standing together." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the farm, the crowds slowly began to disperse. Many left gifts, homemade jams, hand-knitted scarves, and countless letters of thanks. The Silvers promised to donate these items to local charities, keeping only the letters as precious reminders of the day. That evening, exhausted but exhilarated, the family gathered in the living room. Thunder lay in his usual spot at Jack's feet, tired but content after a day of being the center of attention. "I can't believe how many lives we've touched," Mary said, her voice filled with wonder. "All those people from all over the country." Anna nodded, her eyes bright with excitement. "And it's not just about us anymore. Did you see how many of them were sharing their own stories of standing up against corruption? We've started something bigger than ourselves." Emily, who had been furiously taking notes all day, looked up from her notebook. "This is more than just a follow-up story," she said. "This is a movement. People are hungry for change, for justice. What happened here in Green Hill, it's become a blueprint for communities everywhere." Jack listened to them all, a mix of emotions swirling in his chest, pride, humility, and a deep sense of responsibility. He looked down at Thunder, remembering how it all started with the dog's insistent barking. "You know," he said, addressing everyone but giving Thunder an affectionate pat, "when I think about how close we came to losing everything and how far we've come since then, it almost seems like a dream. But it's real, and it's all because we refused to give up, because we stood together." Father Thomas, who had joined them for the evening, nodded sagely. "That's the power of community, of faith in something greater than ourselves. You've shown people that ordinary individuals, when united, can accomplish extraordinary things." As the night deepened, the conversation turned to the future. The foundation they had established with the book proceeds was already making a difference, providing legal and financial support to other communities facing similar challenges. "We should organize a conference," Anna suggested. "Bring together community leaders, legal experts, journalists, create a network of support and knowledge sharing." The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon they were all brainstorming, filled with renewed energy despite the long day. As the clock struck midnight, Mary finally insisted it was time for bed. As the others headed upstairs, Jack lingered in the living room with Thunder. "What do you think, old friend?" he asked softly, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Did you ever imagine your barking would lead to all this?" Thunder looked up at him with those wise, loyal eyes, and Jack could have sworn he saw understanding there. The dog gave a soft woof as if to say, "I always knew you had it in you." Jack chuckled and stood up, stretching his tired muscles. "Come on, boy. Let's get some rest. Something tells me our adventure is far from over." As they climbed the stairs, Jack's mind was already racing with plans for the future. The Green Hill story had sparked a flame of hope and change, and he was determined to see it spread far and wide. Outside, the night was clear and star-filled. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. Green Hill slept peacefully, its residents unaware that their small village had become the heart of a movement that would continue to grow and inspire for years to come. In the Silver farmhouse, as Jack drifted off to sleep with Thunder curled up at the foot of the bed, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. For his family, for his community, for the loyal dog who had started it all, and for the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, he knew they would face them together, united by the bonds of love, loyalty, and a shared commitment to justice. And as long as that spirit lived on, there was hope for a brighter future, not just for Green Hill, but for communities everywhere. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn day in Green Hill. As Jack stepped out onto the porch with his morning coffee, Thunder at his heels, he was struck by how normal everything seemed after the excitement of the previous day. The field stretched out before him, golden in the early light, and the air was crisp with the promise of the changing season. But as he stood there, Taking in the familiar sights and sounds of his beloved farm, Jack realized that while the landscape might look the same, everything had changed. Green Hill was no longer just a quiet farming community. It had become a symbol, a beacon of hope for people across the nation. His musings were interrupted by the sound of a car coming up the driveway. It was Emily, arriving earlier than usual, her face alight with excitement. "Jack," she called out as she hurried from her car, "you won't believe the news I just received." Intrigued, Jack set down his coffee mug and waited for Emily to catch her breath. Thunder perked up his ears, sensing the excitement in the air. "I just got off the phone with a producer from a major news network," Emily explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "They want to do a documentary about Green Hill and the movement it's inspired. They're calling it the Thunder Effect. Isn't that perfect?" Jack couldn't help but laugh. The Thunder Effect? Well, I suppose that's fitting. After all, it was this old boy's barking that started it all. He reached down to ruffle Thunder's fur affectionately. As they discussed the details of the proposed documentary, Mary and Anna joined them on the porch, drawn by the commotion. The idea of sharing their story on such a large scale was both exciting and a little daunting, but they all agreed it was an opportunity they couldn't pass up. "Think of how many more people we could reach, how many more communities we could inspire," Anna said, her eyes shining with the possibility. Mary, ever practical, added, "We'll need to make sure the whole town is involved. This isn't just our story. It belongs to all of Green Hill." Jack nodded in agreement. "You're right. We should call a town meeting, get everyone's input. If we're going to do this, we'll do it as a community." As the day progressed, word of the documentary spread through Green Hill like wildfire. By evening, it seemed the entire town had gathered in the community center, eager to hear more and share their thoughts. The meeting was a lively affair, with everyone from the oldest residents to the youngest children wanting to have their say. Ideas flew back and forth, suggestions for locations to film, stories to highlight, even proposals for a town-wide beautification project to prepare for the camera crews. In the midst of the excited chatter, Sheriff Oliveira stood up, calling for attention. "Folks, this is a wonderful opportunity for Green Hill, no doubt about it. But let's not forget why our story matters. It's not about fame or putting our town on the map. It's about showing the world that when ordinary people stand together against injustice, extraordinary things can happen." A hush fell over the room as people absorbed the sheriff's words. Then, slowly, heads began to nod in agreement. The mood shifted from excitement to determination, a collective resolve to use this opportunity to further the cause they had all fought so hard for. As the meeting wound down and people began to disperse, Jack found himself standing with Mary, Anna, Emily, and Sheriff Oliveira, Thunder faithfully by his side. "You know," Jack said thoughtfully, "a year ago I never would have imagined we'd be here planning a national documentary about our little town. But looking at all of you, I realize that the real story isn't about what happened to us. It's about what we did together as a community." Mary squeezed his hand, "and about the ripple effect it's had across the country. We're not just telling our story anymore. We're part of something much bigger." Anna, her face serious, added, "Which means we have a responsibility to make sure this documentary isn't just about the past, but about the future, about giving other communities the tools and the courage to stand up for themselves." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. We can use this platform to showcase the work of the foundation, to connect with other activists and community leaders. The possibilities are endless." As they continued to discuss their vision for the documentary, Thunder suddenly perked up, his tail wagging furiously. Following the dog's gaze, they saw a group of children approaching, led by little Timmy, the son of the local schoolteacher. "Mr. Silver," Timmy called out, slightly out of breath from running. "We heard about the documentary. We want to help too." Jack crouched down to the boy's level, smiling warmly. "That's wonderful, Timmy. What did you have in mind?" The children exchanged excited glances before Timmy continued. "We thought maybe we could make a big mural, telling the whole story of Green Hill. And Thunder could put his paw print on it." The adults couldn't help but laugh at the children's enthusiasm. "That sounds like a fantastic idea," Jack said, ruffling Timmy's hair. "Why don't you kids work on some designs and we'll present them at the next town meeting?" As the children ran off, chattering excitedly about their project, Jack straightened up, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said to the others, "maybe that's the most important part of all this. Making sure the next generation understands the importance of community, of standing up for what's right." Sheriff Oliveira nodded solemnly. "Amen to that. These kids, they're the future of Green Hill and of our country. If they grow up understanding the power they have when they work together, well, that's a legacy to be proud of." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town square, the group began to disperse. But there was a palpable energy in the air, a sense of purpose and unity that seemed to touch everyone in Green Hill. Walking home with Mary and Thunder, Jack felt a deep sense of contentment. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but he knew that together they could face anything. The spirit of Green Hill, of community, courage, and unwavering determination would continue to inspire and guide them, no matter what the future might hold. And as they reached their farmhouse, the first stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky, Jack realized that their story was far from over. In fact, it felt like they were standing on the threshold of a new chapter, one filled with hope, possibility, and the promise of positive change not just for Green Hill but for communities everywhere. With Thunder trotting faithfully beside him, Jack stepped into his home, ready to embrace whatever adventures tomorrow might bring. The legacy of Green Hill, and the movement it had inspired, was just beginning to unfold. As the weeks passed, Green Hill buzzed with anticipation and activity. The documentary crew arrived, setting up their equipment and conducting interviews with seemingly everyone in town. The Silver Farm became a hub of activity, with Thunder often stealing the show, his tail wagging happily as he basked in the attention. One crisp morning, as Jack was showing the crew around the property, he noticed a sleek black car pulling up the driveway. A well-dressed woman stepped out, her demeanor professional yet friendly. "Mr. Silver," she called out, approaching with an outstretched hand. "I'm Sarah Thompson from the governor's office. Do you have a moment to talk?" Intrigued, Jack excused himself from the film crew and led Sarah to the porch where they could speak privately. Thunder, ever vigilant, followed closely behind. "Mr. Silver," Sarah began once they were seated, "the governor has been following your story with great interest. He believes that what happened here in Green Hill could be a model for addressing corruption and land rights issues across the state." Jack leaned forward, his interest piqued. "That's certainly good to hear. What exactly does the governor have in mind?" Sarah's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "He wants to create a task force focused on protecting small communities from corporate land grabs and corruption, and he'd like you to be a part of it." Jack was momentarily speechless. The idea that their local struggle could influence state policy was both exciting and somewhat overwhelming. "I'm flattered," he finally said, "but I'm just a farmer. I don't know the first thing about state-level politics or policy making." Sarah smiled warmly. "That's exactly why the governor wants you involved. You bring real-world experience and a grassroots perspective. You'd be working alongside legal experts, community organizers, and policymakers to create meaningful change." As they continued to discuss the details, Mary joined them on the porch, listening intently. When Sarah finally left, promising to send more information, Jack turned to his wife, his expression a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "What do you think, Mary? This is a big step. It would mean spending time away from the farm, from Green Hill." Mary took his hand, her eyes shining with pride. "Jack, when we started this fight, it was just about our farm, but it's grown into something so much bigger. If you have the chance to help other communities, to make real change at the state level, I think you have to take it." Their conversation was interrupted by Anna, who burst onto the porch, waving her phone excitedly. "Dad? Mom? You won't believe this. I just got off the phone with a group of students from the state university. They want to start a Green Hill Society on campus, dedicated to community activism and fighting corruption." The news left Jack and Mary stunned. Their little village's story was spreading further than they could have ever imagined. As the day wore on, more surprises were in store. Emily arrived with news that major environmental organizations were reaching out, wanting to partner with Green Hill on sustainable farming initiatives. Sheriff Oliveira reported that police departments across the state were requesting training on community-oriented policing, inspired by Green Hill's example. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, joined by Emily and Sheriff Oliveira, there was a palpable sense of excitement and possibility in the air. "It's incredible," Jack mused, looking around the table at his loved ones. A year ago, we were fighting just to keep our farm. Now we're at the center of a statewide movement for change. And it all started with thunder's barking, Anna added with a grin, reaching down to scratch the faithful dog behind the ears. As they discussed the day's developments, the governor's task force, the university club, the environmental partnerships, it became clear that Green Hill's influence was growing far beyond what any of them had anticipated. You know, Sheriff Oliveira said thoughtfully, we need to be careful. With all this attention, there might be people who try to co-opt our message or use Green Hill for their own agendas. Emily nodded in agreement. The sheriff's right. We need to stay true to our roots, to remember what we're really fighting for. Jack leaned back in his chair, absently petting Thunder, who had come to rest his head on his lap. You're both right. We can't lose sight of what matters. Protecting our communities, standing up against corruption and empowering people to fight for their rights. Mary, ever the voice of practical wisdom, added, and we need to make sure Green Hill itself doesn't get lost in all this. We're still a small farming community at heart. As the conversation continued late into the night, plans began to take shape. They would accept the governor's offer, but on their own terms, insisting on transparency and community involvement. The university club would be encouraged, with Anna volunteering to be a mentor, and they would carefully vet potential partnerships to ensure they aligned with Green Hill's values. As the others began to head home, Jack stepped out onto the porch for a moment of quiet reflection. The night was clear, the stars twinkling brightly over the peaceful fields of Green Hill. Thunder padded out to join him, a comforting presence at his side. Well, old friend, Jack said softly, looking down at the loyal dog. Looks like our adventure is far from over. In fact, I think it's just beginning. Thunder let out a soft woof as if in agreement, his tail wagging gently. As Jack gazed out over his beloved farm, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation about the path ahead. The fight that had started here, in this small village, was growing into something much larger. It was a responsibility he never could have imagined, but one he was ready to embrace. With a deep breath of the cool night air, Jack turned to head back inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But for now he was grateful for this moment of peace, for his family, his community, and the faithful dog who had started it all. As he closed the door behind him, Jack knew that whatever the future held, the spirit of Green Hill, of unity, perseverance, and unwavering hope, would continue to guide them. The legacy they were building was not just for themselves, but for communities everywhere who dared to stand up for what was right. And so, as Green Hill slept peacefully under the starry sky, the seeds of change that had been planted in this small village continued to grow, promising a harvest of justice and empowerment that would reach far beyond its humble beginnings. The following weeks saw Green Hill transform into a hive of activity, unlike anything the small town had ever experienced. The documentary crew had become a constant presence, capturing the daily life of the village and its inhabitants. But more than that, Green Hill had become a beacon for activists, journalists, and curious visitors from across the country. Jack found himself busier than ever, balancing his duties on the farm with his new role on the governor's task force. He spent long hours in meetings, both in person and via video calls, sharing Green Hill's story and working to craft policies that would protect other small communities from the threats they had faced. Mary, always the backbone of the family, took on more responsibilities at the farm while also becoming a sought-after speaker at women's empowerment events. Her quiet strength and unwavering support through their ordeal had become an inspiration to many. Anna threw herself into her role as mentor for the university's Green Hill Society, organizing workshops and field trips that brought students to the village to learn firsthand about community activism and sustainable farming practices. Her passion and energy were contagious, inspiring a new generation of changemakers. Emily's reporting on the Green Hill story had catapulted her career to new heights. She was now a regular contributor to national news outlets, using her platform to shed light on similar struggles faced by communities across the country. Despite her growing fame, she remained deeply connected to Green Hill, often returning to work on follow-up stories and to visit the friends who had become like family. Sheriff Oliveira found himself in high demand, invited to speak at law enforcement conferences about community-oriented policing and anti-corruption measures. His down-to-earth approach and practical insights were reshaping the way many departments thought about their role in small communities. And through it all, Thunder remained a constant presence, his unwavering loyalty a reminder of how their journey had begun. The documentary crew had taken to calling him the hero of Green Hill, a title that amused Jack to no end. One sunny afternoon, as Jack was returning from a task force meeting in the state capital, he was surprised to see a crowd gathered in the town square. As he approached, he realized it was the unveiling of the children's mural project. The massive painting covered the side of the old granary, depicting the story of Green Hill in vivid colors. Jack's heart swelled as he saw the scenes unfold, from Thunder's frantic barking at his coffin to the community coming together to fight corruption, and finally, the ripple effect their struggle had created across the nation. At the center of it all was a larger-than-life portrait of Thunder, his paw print prominently displayed beneath. The children had captured the essence of the loyal dog perfectly: his alert eyes, his protective stance, and the unwavering devotion that had started it all. As Jack made his way through the crowd, he was stopped by countless handshakes and words of gratitude. It was moments like these that reminded him of the impact their story had made and the responsibility they now carried. Finally reaching his family at the front of the gathering, Jack wrapped an arm around Mary's waist, pulling her close. "It's something, isn't it?" he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Mary nodded, leaning into him. "It's beautiful, and look how proud the children are. They understand what we fought for, what we're still fighting for." Anna, who had been chatting with some of the young artists, joined her parents. "Dad, you won't believe this. Some of the kids are talking about starting a junior activist club. They want to learn how to make a difference in their community, just like we did." Jack chuckled, his heart full of pride and hope. "Well, looks like Green Hill's legacy is in good hands." As the crowd began to disperse, Jack noticed a familiar figure making his way towards them. It was Robert, August's former assistant, who had played a crucial role in exposing the corruption. He looked nervous but determined as he approached. "Mr. Silver," Robert began, his voice slightly shaky, I wanted to thank you. After everything that happened, I wasn't sure I'd ever be welcomed back here. But the way you and the town have treated me, giving me a second chance, it's meant everything." Jack reached out, clasping Robert's shoulder warmly. "We all make mistakes, Robert. What matters is that when the moment came, you chose to do the right thing. You're as much a part of this story as any of us." As they talked, Thunder, who had been dozing in the shade nearby, suddenly perked up his ears. His tail began to wag furiously as he spotted someone in the crowd. Following the dog's gaze, Jack saw a group of people he didn't recognize making their way towards them. One of the men stepped forward, his weathered face etched with lines of hard work and worry. "Mr. Silver," he said, his voice gruff but respectful, "we've come from a town about 300 miles from here. We're facing the same kind of land grab you all did. And well, we were hoping you might have some advice for us." Jack exchanged glances with Mary and Anna, seeing his own determination reflected in their eyes. This was why they had fought so hard, why they continued to share their story. Not for fame or recognition, but for moments like this, when they could offer hope and guidance to others facing similar struggles. "Of course," Jack said warmly, extending his hand to the newcomers. "Why don't we all head back to the farm? We've got a lot to talk about." As the group made their way down the familiar dirt road towards the Silver farm, Jack couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. What had started as a fight for their own land had grown into a movement that was touching lives across the nation. Thunder trotted alongside them, occasionally looking up at Jack as if to say, "See? This is why I kept barking. This is what I knew all along." Jack smiled, reaching down to pat the faithful dog's head. "You were right, old friend," he murmured. "You were right all along." As they crested the hill, the Silver farmhouse came into view, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. It was still the same modest home it had always been, but now it stood for something far greater, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of community. Jack knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be more battles to fight, more communities to help, more corrupt systems to challenge. But looking at his family, his loyal dog, and the strangers who had come seeking help, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The legacy of Green Hill was still unfolding, its story still being written, and Jack Silver, once a simple farmer fighting for his land, now found himself at the heart of a movement that was changing the world, one small community at a time. As they reached the farmhouse, Jack paused for a moment, taking in the scene before him. The visiting group, eager to share their story and learn from Green Hill's experience. Mary and Anna, already starting to make the newcomers feel welcome, and Thunder, ever vigilant, keeping watch over it all. With a deep breath and a smile, Jack stepped forward to join them. The next chapter of their journey was about to begin, and he was ready to face it head-on, with the same courage, determination, and unwavering spirit that had brought them this far. The legacy of Green Hill and the movement it had inspired continued to grow, promising hope and empowerment for communities everywhere. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth, that when ordinary people stand together, extraordinary things can happen.